What's up, guys, and welcome back to Iron Mustang. On today's video, we're going to talk about gauges. This car, when I got it, had a whole bunch of autometer gauges in there. I didn't get the boxes, the manuals, or anything with it. For that matter, the car's all custom put together from the fuel cell to whatever. So a lot of my sending units and gauges weren't really matched up properly. So I'm going to kind of show you what I got going on in the vehicle already and show you how I resolved a few issues, and then maybe we'll go over the installation of a few of these gauges over a couple of videos, and that'll give me an opportunity to edit some of the stuff that I got coming for you guys. It's taken me a little longer to get out and bang out some quick ones and keep your viewer enjoyment going. So let's get to it. All right, so here's our gauge cluster here. Nice little setup I got from the guy when I purchased the vehicle. Couple issues I was running into though was pretty much the top row, meaning the water, fuel, and the oil pressure were not reading properly. So I'm going to show you guys a couple things I figured out here. So my whole car was wired with an American Auto Wire harness, and great harness, highly recommend it. Unfortunately, I wasn't shooting videos when I installed that, but I wired it like a stock gauge cluster would be wired, and you usually would use a constant voltage regulator, which regulates your voltage down to 5. This needs to be removed if you're using autometer gauges. All the ones I'm aware of run at 12 volts. So obviously double check that that's what you got going on. But if you're having issues, you might want to think about starting there, making sure that your voltages are proper. So I used stock sending units when I first wired up this car for my oil pressure and my temp sensor, and I ended up having to look up the model numbers and found out that Autometer makes their own sending units for the gauges that I had. So if you're having issues, look up your gauge manufacturer's instructions and make sure you're using the right ones. There's Autometer's sensor right there, and I don't know if I can get a good picture of it or not, but down there I got the one for the oil pressure. So that fixed both of those. So basically where we're at right now on this gauge cluster, the fuel is the only thing not reading properly. So that's what the rest of this video is going to focus on, how to determine what sending unit we needed in the fuel tank, and maybe just a quick installation of that. So you can see right now it's reading right about 1/4 of a tank. So here's our tool that we're going to use to figure out what the ohms need to be for the sending unit for the gas tank. This is a 0 to 500 ohm potentiometer. Unfortunately, you really can't use the ones out of guitars because the values are different, even though they look identical. Get yourself a 0 to 500. Cheap ones just fine. They're going to get close enough. You're going to know really what you need. So I'm going to show you how we're going to use this. So what we did here is we just put 2 wires on. Really, the color doesn't matter. What does matter is you have a center pin and 2 outside pins. You need to use 1 center and 1 outside to do this. So we're going to disconnect the sending wire here from our sending unit, and I'll show you what we're going to do. So I did go ahead and disconnect the ground too, just because I know that I'm going to be changing this. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take our tool we made here, and we're going to clip one to the ground. But you could have just left it on the post there, and then we're going to connect one to the sending wire. Now you can see as I move the potentiometer, our reading is going to change here. So first things first, I'm going to set this thing to where it shows 0. All right, now that we're showing 0, we're going to go ahead and leave the potentiometer where it's at. We're going to disconnect it. Now we're going to take our multimeter and we are going to set it to, I know we only need to go to 200 ohms, but we could go to 2000. So we're going to take our clips here, clip one on one side, one on the other side, and we're going to get our reading. We have 2 ohms. Now I'm going to reconnect my wires here. Again, the size really doesn't matter. Now, see if I can zoom back in on my gauge here for you guys. Now we're going to rock it up to full. Now, these things always show full a little past the full line, so go a little past a 1/4 inch, and you'll kind of see why here in a second. Now we're going to disconnect it. Now we're showing 98 ohms. Now I'm going to show you guys something real quick because I've already figured this out. Okay, I need a 0 to 90 ohm gauge. Okay, so I'm going to put this thing on 90, disconnect it, reconnect it. So a 1/4 was a little too far. When I set it a little farther, I was reading about 105 ohms. I set it back to 90, it showed right there. So I know a 0 will show me 0 on this, and 90 is going to show me right there. So I need a 0 to 90 ohm sending unit. And would you look at that? We got one in the mail from Summit, an SN38 from Classic Instruments. This is going to solve our problem. So let's see what we got here. And just for the record, I have no sponsors on this channel, so I pay for all the stuff you guys see me installing so far. Alright, that's making a lot of noise. Let's get rid of that. So we got a gasket, some hardware, some O-rings, a sending unit, and some instructions. And it's probably good practice to remove the batteries when you're doing anything electrical, but these sending units are actually just the ground. So we're pretty much far away from anything else I think that's going to give us any issues. So I'm going to grab the correct screwdriver here because the other one came with some different style screws. And we're going to go ahead and pull this sending unit out real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the gasket that came on the one that was in my vehicle. And I'm going to reuse that because, quite frankly, it's brand new. Now these screws here, these little O-rings are supposed to slide on them. I'm going to put them on there just for the fun of it. But I'm going to use the other hardware that was on the vehicle already, as long as the thread's the same, just because it matches all the other hardware on that tank. So keep our screws looking consistent on it. So we're going to set these aside, but that's what you'd use there. There's our new gasket. We're going to set that aside. Actually, we're just going to toss that back in the bag that it came from. Our tank depth is about 10¼ inches. So it says for tank depths of 6 inches to 15½, it will be necessary to remove the lower mount bracket. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first remove these 2 screws. We're going to set these aside. We won't be using those again. And we're going to flip it over. We're going to remove these 2 screws out of the plastic bracket. And we are going to sit these over here. These are going to get used again. Then we are going to slide this out, this middle bar here, and we're going to discard it. We don't need this either. And then we're going to reinstall this back where it was. Those are a little tricky to drive in, so I went and set it on my vise on a real nice flat surface and made sure I used the big screwdriver. Those would have been really easy to strip had I not done that. So the instructions say that we're supposed to measure from the top of the gasket. Then we're going to do half the tank depth plus 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to throw a gasket up there and measure our tank depth real quick. And I just put it through a screw hole there. I kind of feel like that helps me get it pretty straight up and down. So just take this back. So that's going to give us a depth of 10 1/4. So our total tank depth was 10 1/4. Half of that's going to be 5 1/8 plus 1/8. So we're back to 5 1/4. And we're measuring to the center pivot point there. So we established half the tank distance plus 1/8 of an inch from the top of the gasket, which is going to be not include the gasket, is 5 1/4, and we're right there, 5 1/4 to the center of the pivot. So this gasket, I don't know how thick it is, but it's about the same thickness as my ruler here. The ruler is a little bit thinner, but it says what we're supposed to do here is, it says basically what we're supposed to do is make the float arm come up there and be flush with the, actually in this case, the bottom of the gasket. So the ruler I got here is about the same thickness of the gasket. So it says we're supposed to do the float so it like is even with the bottom of the gasket. So we're not going to include the gasket because we're basically making this substitute as our gasket, and kind of get something like that right there. So let's get this screw out and kind of start figuring out where we're at. So I don't believe the instructions explicitly say this, but I have a feeling this arm is in here to make sure you don't lose the orientation. So make sure when you pull this out, whenever you slide in your float assembly, that you're retaining it on the correct side. So right there. All right, so the instructions don't really say this, but it shows it resting on the back of that there and flush with the bottom of your gasket up here. So I'm gonna rest this back portion here on the back blade right there, just how the diagram shows. Run this up to the top. Get it right there, tighten it down. We kind of hit the top and the back at the same time. And according to the manufacturer instructions, we're supposed to whack this off. So I'm gonna hit this with a angle grinder real quick, or cutoff wheel, and I think we're good to reinstall it. This is the one that came out of my Mustang Saphir tank, and this is the one that we set up per the manufacturer's instructions. There's some geometry differences here. I'm going to call these guys tomorrow. I may end up taking this back out and mimicking these measurements based on what they say, but I showed you guys how to set this up per the manufacturer's instructions. So let's get it back into the tank and see how we turned out. I did have to go ahead and rotate this head so this would sit straight with the float pointing the proper direction. So if you enjoy these kind of videos and want to see more, make sure you click that like and subscribe. On the next one, we're probably going to be installing the wideband O2 sensor so we can start getting the carburetor tuned up. And as always, thanks for watching.